The federal government has taken $15 million from South Australia's students and young people. I'm sure that the Treasurer and the Minister for Education will be acutely aware of this, but for the benefit of the House, I will explain. The Federal Labor Party, in late 2022, indicated that it will cease what had been its operation for many years, certainly since the institution of the Federal Education Act, of funding every student in our schools to 80% of the student resource standard for non-government schools, less parents' capacity to pay, and indeed 20% of the student resource standard for public schools. And that included students in South Australian schools that had entered reception mid-year, under mid-year reception entry. A long-standing practice in many South Australian schools, which indeed has been reintroduced for public schools by this government after the former Labor government withdrew that opportunity about a decade ago. Now, these students who are in the mid-year reception entry, these are students who turn 5 after the 1st of May in the year that their cohort born before the 1st of May would be entering reception. In South Australian non-government schools particularly, and now public schools as well, those students get an extra 6 months of reception. And that has been proceeding in Catholic schools and a range of independent schools for an extended period of time, and now in our public school system as well. And they have been counted as their compatriots in reception to Year 12, as students in the Gonski model applied accordingly. Those students, sir, deserve to be supported for their education. Those schools provide that opportunity. It is beneficial to the students. Indeed, it is particularly beneficial to those students. The records show that whether it's Year 1 phonics check data or whether it's Year 3 NAPLAN results, students have had the benefit of that extra 6 months of reception schooling are outperforming their compatriots. This was an election policy the government, the Labor Party, took to the last state election to extend that to public schools, and it's been popular. I note that in the estimates process, we identified that the cost for state government schools was $29 million a year, which is approximately $22 million a year more than Labor said it would cost. But nevertheless, I'm actually not going to focus my criticism on state Labor for having a budget blowout. It is clearly a benefit to those students, and the Liberal Party will support it continuing in the years ahead. It was a close-run thing. We were certainly considering implementing it ourselves. We ultimately didn't do it, and the Labor government did. That's fine. That's good. Those students will benefit, as students in non-government schools did too. But $15 million from the federal government, $15 million from the federal government is what Treasury and the Education Department was counting on to support students in government schools and students in non-government schools in South Australia, and the federal government has now chosen not to proceed. They gave 1 year's grace. So in late 2022, they said, oh, okay, there's a couple of months to go, so we'll fund them in 2023. But this year, 2024, these students are not funded. The state government can make up the shortfall in the public schools, that shortfall being in the order of $7 million. $7 million extra that the state government is having to come up with because the federal government is not paying for their share. For non-government schools, in estimates we explored, and we don't have the exact number, but from what I can tell, there's $2 million that the state government continues to provide to non-government schools for these students. The federal government's share would therefore be in the order of about $8 million a year that is not being paid by the federal government to our non-government schools. Now, most of this money is not going to wealthy or schools that might be considered elite. Most of this money is indeed going to the lower SES non-government schools with mid-year reception programs. Schools in the Catholic education system, small parish country Catholic schools with a mid-year reception program now getting no federal government funding to support those parents who are either going to have to pay for that through increased fees in those schools, or alternatively, if the federal government maintains their position of refusing to pay for these students' entitlements, through the rest of the school students receiving less, so that some support can be given to these mid-year reception entry students. Or potentially, worst of all, some schools may have to make the decision to withdraw this program. So those small Catholic parish schools will suffer. The other group of students who will really suffer are those students in low SES non-government schools, independent schools, who don't even have the backing of a broader system, such as Catholic Ed does, to back them up. Those schools may be low fee, maybe $1,000 or $2,000 fee schools, and the majority of their funding actually comes through the federal government subsidy for those low SES non-government schools. We're not talking about schools that have the capacity to bring in extra parental funding. Schools such as that where the Deputy Speaker was formerly the business manager, serving communities with very low fees, and indeed the Gonski model recognises that. But the way the federal government is applying the Gonski model, it won't recognise that. These schools will be left high and dry, and worst of all, these students will be left high and dry. Now, the Minister says that they're still in negotiations with the Commonwealth, and he said in estimates that the outcomes of those negotiations are yet to be finalised. But I think that the state government needs to do more. I think that the state government needs to unambiguously come out again and urge the federal government to change their tune. To be clear, it's not even as if there's a good reason why they're not doing this. It's the Catholic Education document on media reception, South Australian funding, says the withdrawal of Commonwealth funding makes no sense. And I'll quote from the Catholic Ed document, it bears reading. The withdrawal of funding will put financial pressure on schools committed to educating this student cohort, and it makes no sense as to why children in a school setting are now not being funded. The only rationale being offered for the funding backflip is to save the Commonwealth government money. Yet children not in schools are likely to be in childcare. And as they go on to say, any saving the Commonwealth makes from abolishing mid-year intake funding will be far outweighed by the much larger cost of providing childcare subsidies. They're right. Now, this is a uniquely South Australian issue because for whatever accident of circumstance and history, schools in other jurisdictions have not traditionally offered a mid-year intake. But maybe they should consider it. And maybe the Commonwealth Parliament should consider encouraging them to do so. The statistics speak for themselves. The Commonwealth Government has now actually got on board with policy that was controversial when we promised it in 2017 of having a Year 1 phonics check around the place, around every school in Australia in the years ahead. Year 1 phonics check results show that students who've done the extra 6 months benefit from that, as do Year 3 NAPLAN results. So it's in their educational interest. But it would also save the Commonwealth Government an enormous amount of money in their social services and childcare budget if they are no longer having to provide childcare subsidies for that 6 months before students are entering school or indeed preschool. And if that goes into the education budget instead, there's better outcomes for everybody. This is $15 million that the federal Labor government has taken from South Australian students, and South Australian students deserve better. We need more work from the Labor Party here in South Australia to get their federal colleagues to reverse this terrible decision. Just highlight one other issue that relates to this. The state Labor government is spending $29 million a year to deliver the mid-year entry program for public school students. Now, as identified just then, the Commonwealth is not recognising these students in terms of the Education Act and the Gonski allocation. I asked a question of the Minister for Education as to whether these students, and indeed this $29 million we're spending on these students, is counted towards our Gonski allocation, towards what is required by the state government to be spent on public schooling to meet our obligations under the Education Act. The Minister took it on notice. I look forward to his response coming in due course. But of course, if it is not counted, if it is not entitled to be counted towards our Gonski allocation, and we have been using it in identifying as part of our Gonski allocation to the board that assesses whether we are meeting our responsibilities, then it may indicate that we do need to spend some extra money in our public schooling system as well.